So before I start explaining kind of GitOps and how we apply it for our work, I just wanted to prompt, are you guys familiar with GitOps and ArgoCD? Just trying to understand how much you guys know.
Since we have it recorded, assume that you are
Okay,
familiar with Git, but maybe not with GitOps.
cool. Okay, so we're talking about kind of operating in an open environment. So in this case, for us, that means GitHub. And how do we kind of reconcile that difference between, well, you have this live environment, OpenShift, and all these clusters as part of the cloud, and you're making changes in that live environment. So where's that transparency, right? So we get around that by using GitOps. And what that essentially boils down to is operations with Git, meaning that because everything in OpenShift essentially boils down to a resource that can be described via a YAML file, this allows for a declarative setup. So like anything that you have deployed on OpenShift, you can save as a file in Git. So if it's like a deployment or if it's like a cluster role binding, whatever it is, that all of these kind of resources that make up your OpenShift cluster, we put it in Git, and then we have something called ArgoCD, which is a GitOps tool that will then deploy all of those manifests in Git to your OpenShift environment and just make sure that everything is the same. So like, and we keep all of these manifests in this one huge mono repo called the apps repo, right? And this repo, we try to basically make it so all of the different clusters that we manage, they're all, everything that's kind of deployed on it is located in this repo. Everything that the operate first admin team manages, not user workloads. We give people that have their own namespace, that we've given them their own namespace that they're deploying stuff into. They are free to use GitOps or not. That's up to them. But for things like services that we manage, for example, Jupyter Hub or cluster RBAC or privileged resources like subscriptions, operators, all that stuff, we put that in this repo. And then we have ArgoCD, which then takes everything in this repo and all of these manifests and then deploys them to the different clusters, right? So if I so this is the ArgoCD UI. And if I look at the settings and I see click clusters, I can see these are all the different clusters that ArgoCD can deploy to. And then if I go to the main kind of page, you see these like little boxes everywhere. Each one of these boxes represents a Git ArgoCD application. So not to be confused with maybe your general understanding of what an application is. An ArgoCD application, you can think of it as more like a abstraction that is made up of two main key things. One is a source and one is a destination, right? So for example, we have an application here, right? This basically has a source, which is a GitHub repository path. And then it has a destination, which is a cluster, right? So we put our manifests in the source, which is the GitHub repository, and then it will deploy it to a cluster, right? And in this way, and it makes sure that that always stays in sync, right? So if I was to look at, for example, this application called Cluster Resources -smog, so this is an application that has a source which points to so this repo, right? And it has a destination, which is a cluster, right? And all the other stuff is kind of just like added flavor on what it does, but it's a specific path in the repo, right? So that's the source. So I think that's it for GitOps. We put everything for all different clusters in this one location, right? And if you're familiar with Kustomize, it's just a way to bundle manifests together, and we use that to separate out this repository and organize it so that we have our configurations being shared amongst different environments. So to explain what that means, if I was to, for example, go to a location like Dex, which is another tool besides Keycloak that we use to do auth for certain services. And if I look at overlays, which you'll see that it's kind of like split into different environments. And what's located here, again, it's just manifests, but they're all manifests that are being shared between what's located in this base. right? Don't want to get too detailed in this, but the general idea and takeaway is that we put our common configurations for applications in this base directory, and then we can pull it all down into these separate overlays and only change the things that are relevant to like the different clusters, right? This way we reduce repetition, and then we can have ArgoCD deploy all of these different environments using the ArgoCD applications, which I showed you over here, right? So that's essentially what the GitOps is, right? Like it's a very kind of simple concept. You're taking everything in Git, and the benefits of this is that if something crashes, if we lose the cluster, what we had to put in the cluster, we can easily bring it back up because I can just go into these applications and then I can be like sync, and then it will deploy everything in that cluster again, right? And another benefit is that if instead of, let's say, for example, I go to OpenShift, right? And I go to, let's say I go to this cluster that we manage, and I go to, give it a second to load, right? I log in. So this is our keycloak login via GitHub. If I go to, for example, some workload and I go to deployment and I want a new deployment, I can create a deployment from here, or I could have a file in my local file system and apply it and create a deployment from there, right? But then this is not really, like, only I know about this decision, that this action that I'm taking, right? Like Tom doesn't know what I'm doing, doesn't know if I'm doing it right, and he doesn't know, maybe like I put in like a replica, like 3 replicas when I was supposed to put in 5 replicas. I don't know, right? Or if I'm deploying an operator, maybe I'm deploying it to the wrong channel or using the wrong channel. So if I'm doing it all via Git, however, then I'm doing it via a pull request, right? I'll fork this repository, and then I will say, okay, in this like PR, you can see that I'm deploying this operator, and somebody can look and review that PR, and then we can also put that PR under CI checks, right? So like we can have some tests in place and see that everything is well formed. And we don't have integration tests right now, but we plan to add those in the future, and that's more you can do. So it kind of makes that process a bit more, every change that goes into the cluster goes through a series of like checks and what have you. And then once it's merged in, ArgoCD automatically deploys those manifests. So that's how that works. We have other repositories here that kind of help with this process. We put all our ArgoCD apps in this repo, but the plan is eventually to also move it back into the apps repo. Because there's really no reason, so this will eventually go away. We have other repositories. It's the support. Basically, everybody, whenever they have a question, we direct people here. We'll probably touch more on communication channels later on. And I think I'll leave the alerts repo to the monitoring side. But I think that's it for GitOps. Yeah. Awesome. Anand, do you want to take away for monitoring?
Sure. Do you want to do ACM first, or did you already do that?
Yeah, I guess I can slightly cover ACM. So ACM, Advanced Cluster Management, I think Tom touched on it a little bit. This is what our ACM instance looks like. We deploy everything via ACM. I'm sorry, we deploy all our clusters. Well, we don't deploy some of the clusters we already had before, like bare metal installs, but we can bring them into ACM, so they're ACM managed. And having them ACM managed also makes it easy to have that kind of ArgoCD integration. So before I showed you this kind of cluster list, right? This list is every time we add a cluster to ACM, we want ArgoCD to be able to automatically deploy to that cluster, and ACM offers integrations to do that. So that is one other way that's kind of like nice to have with ACM. All our AWS clusters, we provision via ACM. So it's nice to have that kind of capability. We're working on, if other teams have already a OpenShift cluster, we have a doc that's about to go out that will mix that kind of, how do you make your cluster part of our cloud and then use our tooling to help manage that cluster. So we have docs that are about to go out to like kind of describe that. It's a very simple process. And then we have the whole provisioning of the AWS, which I mentioned, and that is also, it's like a few steps. We also have docs on how to do that. Yeah, that's that's really. Oh, and another thing, we just recently upgraded our ACM to allow us to better assign permissions, which you can do now with ACM. Like if you want a certain team to only manage a certain cluster, that's something that's about to come very soon as well. So you don't always have to give everybody access to everything. So yeah, I think that's it. Anand?